Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. As you can see, how about the wonderful animation work by our guy Cody Chafin's there? Gorgeous look at UGA with the hearts raining down. That's like real work right there. That's beautiful stuff in honor of Valentine's Day. We appreciate all of you sharing that Friday with us, this special Valentine's edition of the program. It's going to be a fun one for us. Before we're done, Diamond Dogs, the Georgia baseball team, begins its 2025 season today. We will pay homage to that here today. Jeff Sentell stops by. We'll do some UGA recruiting talk with him. Also, in addition to that, speaking of Georgia recruiting targets, kind of interesting news out there related to one of the biggest names of all in this class of 2026 and a former Dog trying to influence that decision. We'll give you some on that. There's perhaps a little bit of a change to Georgia's NIL efforts in its pursuit, so we'll kind of give you information on that. And we'll start with what I think is really fun. Georgia fans yesterday were fired up about one of their own apparently not getting the level of respect that many thought he was due. Feels like a pretty good place for us to begin, so why don't we do that here for a few minutes. We are so happy to have you with us for what is a getaway day for me, but a lot of work to do prior to that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is nothing I love to see more than Georgia fans. They're all kind of like rallied together around a cause. And oftentimes this happens during the fall, during the season for whatever might be going on, good, bad, or anything else in between. But it doesn't have to be football season for Georgia fans to kind of come together in unison around something. Yesterday, an example of that, the NFL Scouting Combine extended its invites. Georgia had 14 players overall, former Dogs, 14 of them on their way to Indianapolis for the Scouting Combine. But one of the guys that was not there certainly got plenty of attention, the fact that Georgia safety, former Georgia safety Dan Jackson, was not among the invitees to the NFL Scouting Combine. Now, this kind of got everybody all fired up. I thought our Kaylee Manziel was very funny on X talking about this yesterday. Many of Georgia fans were too, basically just sort of ready to come to blows over the fact that Jackson had been snubbed. And honestly, I would say that I'm right there with you on that. Jackson played at kind of an all-SEC level for Georgia in his final season. He was third-team all-SEC, for instance. Senior Bowl recently acknowledged him as the top safety during the week leading into the game. He certainly handled his business very well in Mobile for all of that. Has been a big player at Georgia dating all the way back to the 2021 season, the first of those national championship years for UGA. Dan Jackson is a real football player of real acclaim, a guy who's a far better athlete than the thing that people give him credit for, including, I guess, the NFL Scouting Combine folks too. And his omission from the NFL Scouting Combine tells us a lot more about the deficiencies of how they select the players who get the invite than it does anything that might be wrong with Dan Jackson. It is great to see Georgia fans kind of coming together around this as strongly as they have. And I'm here to tell you that whether Jackson got included by the Scouting Combine or not, we think that he's on his way to an NFL career. And stories like this, I think, are pretty interesting in kind of showing you the top level of, I don't want to say intelligence, but football savviness of like the ability to recognize the true diamonds in the rough. That really is the thing that separates the very best in football from kind of the next group, because there's a certain kind of talent evaluation that anybody can recognize and anybody can notice. But the best rosters, whether it be in college, the NFL, are also going to be built by recognizing what others don't see. And that's one of those things that Georgia has always been very good at. Frankly, there are a lot of NFL teams that are just simply not, because in a league that's built for parity, there are some teams that are almost bad every single year, kind of defying the way in which the structure of the league is set up to avoid that kind of ineptitude. There are some teams that just can't avoid it. They fall face first into it. And we would say stuff like Dan Jackson is one of the reasons why. They simply can't see beyond the most obvious talent evaluation opportunities. But Georgia, to its credit, has been good at that sort of thing. In fact, if you want to go back to, we mentioned the success that Jackson had at the Senior Bowl in Mobile a few weeks ago. At that time, our Kaylee Manziel had a chance to catch up with Dan and talk about his story. And honestly, it's worth telling again because apparently there are a bunch of folks connected to the NFL or in Indianapolis connected to the NFL Scouting Combine who don't know enough about this story. So let's let Dan Jackson tell more of his story in his own words. This is just from a couple of weeks ago.
Number one, my dream was to play at Georgia. And, preferred walk-on deal or, kind of had a spot there. And I couldn't pass that up. And that came along, and so that was my dream. And then from then, it was whatever I could do to get on the field. And now we're here.
Why was Georgia the best fit for you, and how has that decision changed your life?
Well, number one thing is I told myself when I first got there, I knew it was going to be a grind, but I wanted to surround myself with the best of the best because I feel like when you surround yourself with great people, then great things happen. And I wanted to be surrounded by winners, and that's what we did.
So listen, when you hear a guy like that talk, now admittedly I'm not objective on this. Obviously I have my own biases. Of course that's true. But when you hear a guy like that talk, that's at the very least a guy I want to give a chance to. Now, the NFL is tricky because even the guys who make it don't often last in the league for very long, and about half the draft picks, even in the first round, are sometimes not going to quite pan out. It is a very difficult league sometimes to project who will make it and who won't. Sometimes players that from a profile standpoint, physical characteristic standpoint, look pretty similar. Sometimes one guy ends up thriving and the other guy ends up not. And prior to their entrance into the league, it'd be pretty difficult to predict which would be which, but it just sort of works out that way. You've got to believe and imagine within the players that do make it in the NFL, who do make good on the potential and the opportunity that's given to them, sort of that intangible characteristic of their grit, their toughness, their willingness to kind of fight for every single moment, the old Kirby Smart phrase that he's used before about eating off the floor, that some of that seems to be kind of a common denominator for some of the players that do succeed in the NFL. And when you hear Jackson talk, boy, you're led to believe that that's the kind of guy that I at least want to give the chance to. I at least want to give him the opportunity to showcase himself. And the good news is you don't need the NFL Scouting Combine to have an NFL career. You'll get your pro day opportunity, and you better believe the best GMs, the best personnel guys in the sport will be looking more closely at a Georgia pro day than they're going to be at a lot of the guys that may be at the NFL Scouting Combine or some of these other scouting opportunities they have because of the track record for success that Georgia players now have in the NFL. Latest example of that, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles and their world championship. And I think it's interesting to kind of go back to when all of this began for the Eagles and the former Georgia players shortly after Georgia's 2021 national championship. Howie Roseman said something, that's the Eagles GM, that has just sort of resonated with me ever since then. I mean, this is such an unusual thing to hear a NFL personnel man say about a single college program. I'm going to show you this on the screen and read it to you here. Zach Berman's a reporter up there in Philadelphia, quoting Roseman at the time when you're looking in on all these 2021 Georgia guys. Howie Roseman, the Eagles GM, says that scouts can basically spend their whole fall down at Georgia. It's like, hey, listen to this, one-stop shopping down there. You go to practice, you go to a game, you go visit that facility, and you're just going, shoot, I'll just draft this whole team. That's what the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman, said. So we feel like we're probably on fair ground to say when it comes to a Georgia player that's been an all-SEC guy, that played on and was a part of the 2021 defense that the world champion general manager is lauding right there, then, yeah, that guy probably ought to get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to an invite at the scouting combine. He probably should. And if you don't give him that, and if the rest of the NFL doesn't get a chance to see him, then the smartest personnel men in the league, like Howie Roseman, you better believe they're going to be watching this very closely. I'm not the first one to say this, but perhaps this just goes to show you how true it'll eventually be. Would it surprise anybody if somehow, whether it be like a late-round draft pick or an undrafted free agent or something like that, if Dan Jackson ends up being the next of these so-called Philly dogs simply because the smart GMs see at Georgia what sometimes other folks around the NFL are just either unwilling to or incapable of noticing? Perhaps we'll see the very best personnel men in this league identify someone like Jackson, and even if he doesn't get the nod from the NFL Scouting Combine, we believe he has a very good chance at an NFL career coming up, as his career begins. So we're still very much on the side of Dan Jackson here, despite the fact does not quite get the love that he deserves from the NFL Scouting Combine. All right, let me shift gears to something else here just for a moment. I thought this was interesting, and this is one of those things where there's all this kind of these stories that are out there now, and some of this kind of stuff gets to be a little hard to follow. It's probably a little bit boring, but something did sort of jump out at me. There was a story this week. Ross Dellinger had it from Yahoo. He works for Yahoo now, about how there's a company that's been formed to negotiate on behalf of players when it comes to like the EA Sports college football video game. The players get a licensing fee or some sort of, basically payment for their involvement in the game. And there's a company now that wants to kind of group all of those individual player rights together and negotiate on behalf of a large collection of players. They'd love for it to be every player. Right now it's a handful of teams, with someone like EA Sports to say, okay, well, if you want our players in your game, here's what it's going to be. And the company believes they can get more money for the players than they got individually for themselves. And it seems like in the early days there may be some element of that that's true. But in reporting about this, Ross Dellinger put something out that kind of jumped out to me. Let me show you this on the screen here for a moment. That Pathway is the name of this company, and it's being led by Casey Schwab, also Matt Hibbs, who Ross Dellinger calls the ex-UGA collective director, as well as a guy named Bob Phillip. So what's interesting to me about this is I learned from this story from Ross Dellinger that Matt Hibbs is apparently no longer with the Classic City Collective. In fact, if you go to Hibbs' X account, you'll see that his kind of personal bio above there doesn't mention that anymore. It mentions this new Pathway company. So it certainly seems like Hibbs is no longer a part of the Classic City Collective, which that's his business. He wants to go do something different. He has every right to do that. My point in mentioning this, though, is that I don't think that NIL is going away, even as we move into a world starting in as soon as July, where like the revenue payments and the shared revenue and the direct compensation from the programs to the players begin. As we get ready to move into that world, I think there's still going to be an opportunity for NIL. The very best programs don't want to leave their compensation sort of solely to what's kind of capped by this house settlement you may have heard about. They're going to want to give themselves the extra advantage in some ways the same way that they're doing now. Programs trying to outspin the others to make sure they enjoy the talent advantage they've had. And some of this has been the Wild West as of late, just because they know that there's about to be, a third party kind of investigating some of these NIL deals to see if they're kind of within the market boundaries, and there's about to be a revenue cap kind of put on the direct compensation from the programs themselves. So things have been probably more aggressive the last couple of years than they perhaps will be moving forward. At least, there's one school of thought that would suggest that's the case. But even as you kind of move into that, there is going to be still a world for NIL payments, for endorsements, for even in some cases, I guess, boosters, things like that, to kind of get in and pay players and give them extra compensation above and on top of what they're going to be paid by the athletic department through the revenue sharing program that's going to exist. And yet, as we kind of move into that world at Georgia, we don't have a lot of clarity. I'm talking about just regular folks, me, you, people who've perhaps even given to the Classic City Collective. We don't have a lot of clarity about what that world's going to look like. And, is there still a role for the NIL collective? Is Matt Hibbs leaving because the Classic City Collective is going away? Is that going to be reshaped, reformed, and look completely different? I do believe for all of college athletics, we need a little bit more, questions answered about this. And perhaps maybe the answers aren't existing right now because nobody necessarily knows, because the revenue sharing world that's coming in July hasn't happened yet. And even some of the legal I's, dotted and T's crossed, there's perhaps some of that still needs to take place too. But it was interesting to me to see this story pop up. Oh, yeah, Matt Hibbs no longer with the Classic City Collective. He's now working for a different company doing a different thing. Where does that leave the Classic City Collective? And what is the role of NIL going to be going forward as the sport kind of moves to a little bit more of a direct compensation model. We don't believe NIL is disappearing, but it's not obvious to exactly how the collectives are going to fit into all of this. Hopefully very soon we'll get some clarity on that, because I think the people that want to know the most about this probably aren't always getting all the answers that they'd like. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're glad you're with us, no matter how you're with us. And by the way, happy Valentine's Day if you're watching on video. I'm very proud of this. We have gorgeous animation here today operating behind me. You see UGA, our video there of him, but also the cool special effect of kind of the hearts raining down here. That is my personal Valentine's gift to all of you. Now, by saying my Valentine gift, I didn't make it. Our good friend Cody Chaffins made it. But if you're watching on video today, get a little Valentine's-themed action behind me on the wall there. That is a great thing to be able to see. Kroger, also a great thing, too, for you if the UGA Valentine's video is a prompt to you that, oh, yeah, I got to take care of that special someone in my life for Valentine's. Well, guess what? Kroger's going to give you your chance to do that. You can shop in store. That's probably the best, most convenient way. But if you need to kind of learn more about this, you can also go to Kroger.com/Valentine's-Day. One more time, Kroger.com/Valentine's-Day. Kroger's got all kinds of stuff. You want to cook a great meal tonight? Well, guess what? They got the ingredients to make that special. You want to give some flowers? They got those for you. You want to give like a gift card or a greeting card? You know, just these little things that make Valentine's really fun and enjoyable. Candy, of course, all that kind of stuff. It is all available for you at your local Kroger. So stop in store, shop in store, or online. One more time, Kroger.com/Valentine's-Day. We certainly appreciate Kroger being a part of DawgNation Daily on the program. Okay, before we're done today, a couple of things. First of all, the Diamond Dogs actually begin their season this afternoon. We're going to hear from Wes Johnson on the show today, previewing the start of a year in which Georgia actually has much larger expectations than it's had maybe in baseball in quite some time. So we'll hear Johnson's thoughts on that as Georgia up in Wilmington, North Carolina, gets ready to get rocking and rolling. Also, many of you know that today's a little bit of a getaway day for me. This is our final live show for a week. We've got 2 pre-recorded shows coming next week on Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we're going to do kind of a hybrid thing where, I can't go a whole week without speaking. So I'm going to have a role on the show in some form, kind of off the top a little bit, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But next week, throughout the week, an entire cast of our friends here at DawgNation are going to step in and be a part of the show live. They'll be taking some of your comments live if you're watching on video. Special content coming from them. This is Cody Chaffins and Kaylee and Connor and Jeff and all kinds of people are going to be a part of a really fun broadcast next week, kind of our normal DawgNation Daily slot. So Monday and Tuesday, show going to sound very similar to the way that it always does. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a little bit of a combination of that. And then the following Monday, I'll kind of be back in the seat again and ready to kind of roll with you through the spring. That is going to be all on the way. We're really excited about that. Also, later on today, as a lead-in to some of what we're going to do next week, we're going to start looking at some of the other SEC teams and kind of so next week, some of the theme of the show is going to be around, okay, snapshot of Georgia, snapshot of the SEC just prior to the start of spring practice. We're going to begin some of that a little bit later on today. That's going to be a lot of fun. But prior to all of that, and Jeff Sentell's appearance here in a couple of minutes, let's also get ready to go around the Doghouse today, presented by our friends at Zagoria Law. And there was a really fun interaction the other day, and I'm a little bit disappointed we haven't been able to get to this until now because I thought this was really good, involving a former beloved Georgia Bulldog, Jalon Walker, and what people hope is a future Georgia Bulldog in Tyler Atkinson. They were also together with obviously Micah Parsons, the terrific NFL star for the Dallas Cowboys. And in the midst of all of this, it sort of turns into a little bit of a makeshift recruiting pitch where Jalon Walker says, hey, why don't you come to Georgia and you wear the same number that I wore? This is really fun, kind of an old school kind of recruiting story of a great dog who just finished up a remarkable career telling Tyler Atkinson, with Micah Parsons there too, that you could basically be kind of the next version of me here at Georgia. I really thought this was great. Tyler shared this on his X account earlier this week. Take a look at Jalon Walker making his recruiting pitch on behalf of Georgia for one of the outstanding members of the 2026 class, Tyler Atkinson.
Number 11 just left. We need a new 11. Yes, number 11 just left. We need a new 11. That was a good one.
So the premise here is that Parsons sort of encouraging him to go to Penn State. Jalon Walker steps in to say, hey, you can come here and wear my number and, do those things at Georgia. And obviously, like, Jalon Walker is just one of the best, most, engaging personalities that Georgia's probably brought in. So if you do have a guy like Jalon Walker recruiting on behalf of UGA for a guy like Atkinson, you got to imagine that something like that's going to work pretty well for Georgia, just because that's how engaging Walker kind of is. And honestly, Tyler Atkinson is also one of those guys playing at Grayson High School, obviously the defending state champs in Georgia in the highest classification. This is a guy that we've seen a lot over the years, and I think it's been obvious really from the moment we first saw him that he was going to be a special football player, very much in the mold of the sort of special linebackers like Jalon Walker or Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean before that, Channing Tindall, going back to Roquan Smith, that Atkinson, whether he ends up going to Georgia or not, certainly has the look of one of those kinds of linebackers. And given the fact that this has become the place where those kinds of linebackers have the most possible success, well, it only stands to reason that he would end up, coming to Georgia. That's certainly what many UGA fans hope for, but they obviously understand this is going to be a highly contested recruitment. And in this day and age, that means NIL. However, can I make another small point about this just for a moment? I think that one of the things that we sometimes see now, and I'll be honest with you, I've been a little bit guilty of this too, where we would say, because I mentioned earlier, this sort of feels like kind of one of those old school recruiting stories of, hey, come be the next Jalon Walker. And there was a time in which that was kind of the way that recruiting worked of, hey, stay in your home state, close the borders. Let's keep this guy at home. Come be the next Jalon Walker. And that very fun, kind of wholesome style of recruiting just felt very, very in vogue for a while, I guess. It sort of seems now at times where it's like it's kind of gotten either more about the bidding war or more about the, concern about the transfer portal and things like that. However, have you kind of noticed this? And this is one of those things that we probably, if we haven't paid enough attention to this yet, we probably should pay a lot more attention to this moving forward. Like, for instance, look at who's about to be drafted. If you pay attention, like mock drafts and things like that, look at who's about to be drafted in the upcoming first round of the NFL draft. For all the hysteria around transfers and for all of the ways in which it doesn't seem like recruiting in the kind of the old school sense matters as much as it used to. The truth is the very best players in college football, as represented by the upcoming first round of the NFL draft, what we kind of identify is there's actually not a lot of transfers in that mix. Sometimes great players do transfer. Caleb Downs is an example of that. Others you can cite here too. But there are going to be a lot of players drafted very high in the upcoming NFL draft that weren't themselves transfers. They did stick with the program that they signed with out of high school. And when you look at what was available this year, at least in the winter portion of the transfer portal, and we believe the spring portal will probably mirror this too because the last couple of years it has, the sort of game-changing player that completely reverses the fortunes for a program and takes it from being, kind of good to the potential of being great. Boy, there doesn't really seem like there were tons of those kinds of players in the transfer portal this year either. That more and more what is happening is that the NIL spending that's going on is being spent to keep players in the program they sign with out of high school. Now, there are some transfers and some guys that always get away. And, in a place like Georgia, you sort of hope those are the, not your most impactful starters, but, players that are maybe just a part of your depth. And for the most part, that's been kind of what it's been. But we're seeing, I think, kind of what looks like kind of a new and emerging trend of players that you sign out of high school actually sort of sticking with these programs, the very best of them anyway, getting NIL money for their loyalty to the program, and then, moving on to the NFL without ever having, tried their hand somewhere else, staying with that program they signed with out of high school for the entire time. So the point of this is that as you're looking at a story like the one involving Tyler Atkinson, and what sort of feels like a continuation of an old theme in recruiting in a very new landscape where it's sort of only about the NIL and should you be using that dollar on a recruit or using that dollar on a transfer or something like that. Just notice how much high school recruiting still matters and how much getting these guys fresh out of high school, finding a way to keep them in your program really is the hallmark of the very best programs at all. And the fact that Georgia has remained as stout as it has in those high school recruiting battles, I think speaks pretty well for Georgia's future. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, Georgia's got its areas of expertise, talent acquisition, certainly one of those. But when it comes to a great outfit like Zagoria Law, their area of expertise has been really refined by focusing in on kind of a narrow aspect of a certain, part of the kind of the personal injury law. You know this by now. You've heard me talk about this plenty. They're the official dog bite injury lawyers of the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's face it, you see stories in the news all the time about, dogs that get loose, they weren't properly cared for, there was negligence on the part of the owner. And honestly, that can be a really dangerous thing. Dog bites are serious. Dogs getting loose at a park and knocking you over, breaking somebody's arm or something like that, especially if it's a child or an elderly person or something along those lines. These can be really serious situations, a situation like any other personal injury claim where compensations perhaps due. And, some pain and suffering needs to be considered. Well, that's what our friends at Zagoria Law want to do for you. So if you or someone you love has been bitten by a dog, injured by a dog that wasn't yours, that wasn't, you believe, properly cared for, let our friends at Zagoria Law fight to get you what you deserve. You can give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G. 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. They can fight for you. They can get you what you deserve. They can literally show you how to win with cases like this because they wrote the book on how to win these types of cases. I mean, an actual real book with their expertise all right there on print. That's what they're all about. So Zagoria Law brings Around the Doghouse to us, and we are certainly glad to have them doing that. All right, a lot to do as it comes to UGA recruiting, including the Tyler Atkinson conversation right there. Let's do that and so much more here on a Friday as we welcome in Jeff Sentell on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's bring in Jeff Sentell here. Jeff, we certainly talked plenty about Tyler Atkinson before, but let me kind of bring this to you with the angle that I was just discussing. A lot of fans are trying to make sense of kind of the new landscape where NIL is clearly the ever-present factor in every one of these discussions. Transfer portal is obviously really big. But if you're looking around, game-changing players, perhaps as good as Tyler Atkinson, there weren't very many of those in the transfer portal this winter. We don't believe there will be this spring either. The highest draft picks for the most part, overwhelming majority this year, probably not transfer players. That it seems like that one of the real emerging trends as of late, the very best players that have, high market value in an NIL world, they're actually being paid by their current school, their current team to stay right where they are. That the guys that, chose school X out of high school oftentimes are sticking with that program now throughout the entirety of their career. At least the recent trend would suggest there's more of that going on. So does that, in your mind, kind of put a re-emphasis on high school recruiting that if you don't get an Atkinson coming out of high school or other players similar to that at different positions, that maybe you're not going to get them because, honestly, there weren't robust examples of, game-changing talent in the winter portal window? What do you make of that?
Yeah. Good morning, Brandon. I think when you say game-changing, I kind of think obvious, no doubt first-round pick. And, Brandon, those no doubt first-round picks, they come and they're plug and play right away. The one thing we don't see in the NIL world is a power program having a player come in and perform. There's lots of examples. KJ Bolden, Dylan Stewart at South Carolina. Everybody has their flash. And those guys stick and stay, and they're 3 years and out. And that's that high-end talent you're talking about. A lot of times the players that transfer out are players that didn't play yet, that weren't obviously one of those special impact freshman. You know, Brandon, I was listening to your Around the Doghouse before we came on, and like, to me, maybe this is just the way I am, because my mindset throughout my life is I'm a very half full, very optimistic guy. But for every gnashing of the teeth about this guy leaving, or this guy not waiting his turn, or this guy hopping into the portal, I want everybody out there to watch the Georgia football team, G-Day, and especially during this fall season. And you can just about bet, I would say, every new face that's starting on the team, that this is their turn, this is their time. And we've been hearing about him forever. We wrote about him in recruiting a couple years ago. You can just about say that somehow these backdoor deals, Brandon, every new Georgia starter has at least turned down one crazy NIL deal to hop into the portal. Like, everybody laments the guys that hop and they say, man, just free agency, it's the Wild West. I want you to think about another thing, perhaps an extreme example of loyalty, how current players on the Georgia team, maybe their second team a year ago, they get some crazy NIL offer and they decide, nope, Georgia's where I'm at. Georgia's where I can stay. Now, of course, those aren't publicized, but I'm telling you, folks, you should just look at that. Those guys on the team that are dogs, that this is their first year to shine, they've turned down some money to stay at Georgia to get to where they are finally with first-team reps.
But it seems like, and I'm happy about that as a Georgia fan, but it also seems like that's just happening everywhere more frequently. Like, we heard rumors of, oh, my gosh, so-and-so school's offering Jeremiah Smith $3 million. That never materialized at all. You know, South Carolina had, I mean, and we don't typically think of South Carolina as among the very best SEC teams, but they may have the best returning offensive and defensive player in the SEC. I mean, Lenora Sellers, I think, is a very good quarterback. I know Dylan Stewart could play for anybody. And yet there hasn't been one peep about either of those two guys leaving, when you might be led to believe other programs have more money to spend. That right now the most interesting story is kind of the dog that doesn't bark, that you know, there was chatter and rumors, Ryan Williams back when he was still 17, he might leave Alabama, but ultimately it just didn't happen. That I do believe panic about potential transfers is still the prevailing thought with most coaches. That's the thing that keeps them up at night. But the actual transfers, there's just not as many of them right now, because it seems like teams are using the dollars they have to keep their players at the Georgia level, at the level perhaps below Georgia, maybe like a South Carolina, maybe at the level even below a South Carolina. That there's a lot more roster stability over the course of the last year or so than I think people probably thought there was going to be.
Yeah, Brandon, there's a good way to look at that. I know you are a gentleman Georgia statesman, and all those circles, those highfalutin circles you roll with, probably a few lawyers in those groups. And one of the things that they've gotten slick about, Brandon, is when you come in at any school in the Southeastern Conference or in the country, what they're doing now is they're putting some sort of triggers in terms of a buyout, in terms of they don't mind paying more of the upfront freight to get the recruit into the program, but they darn sure don't want to develop a kid and let somebody else reap the benefits in year 2 and year 3. That's why you see, I know it kind of got out about Damon Wilson, and there was a reported $400,000 buyout for Wilson, and maybe that might be the reason why he didn't end up at Ohio State, and Missouri coughed up the coin for that. I think you're seeing more and more of that with the freshman level, where there's some savvy folks out there that's like, okay, high school recruit X wants this amount of money. Well, we'll find that money, but we're going to make sure he stays with us for a couple years and not just on a per year basis with a quick out. Lots of buyouts happen. It happened with a couple of players that transferred inside the conference prior to last season.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I also want to talk to you about this, and I want to lose people as we do this, but there was some reporting by Ross Dellinger that Georgia's NIL collective, the Classic City Collective leader, Matt Hibbs, now left, taking a different job, still within kind of the college revenue space, but not as a collective leader at Georgia anymore. What role do collectives play going forward? Is the Classic City Collective still going to be a thing? Obviously, we're moving into later this summer kind of the advent of the revenue sharing, direct payments to players era. We still believe, though, that programs like Georgia are going to seek the extra advantage they're going to get from, kind of, I guess, more traditional NIL type stuff where you're actually paid for a commercial endorsement. So moving forward, Jeff, do we have clarity about what role collectives such as the Classic City Collective, what role they're going to play moving forward?
Yeah, Brandon, here's what I believe to be true. What NIL is going to do is it's going to be more of a supplemental coverage in terms of your high marketable, highest visible players, biggest Q ratings on your team. Now, everybody hopes for this line in the sand in this summer. I believe it's in July where revenue sharing kicks in. And what's supposed to take place, I don't know if you saw the other Dellinger report where there's the groundswell happening right now that NCAA is not going to do anything. No surprise there, shocker. But what should happen is the big conferences are going to step in where NIL kind of evolves in terms of, Brendan, it's got to be legitimate. Like the NIL is going to be for your quarterback or your all-SEC tight end candidate or the guy that, is the fan favorite that moves a lot of jerseys. Like true NIL, and again, this sounds really great to say right now on a show, but true NIL will be exactly that, like the type of deals that you would see, the Atlanta Falcons' most popular players getting in the Atlanta market. That's supposed to supplement the guys that are on it, and they're using the phrase true market value to determine whether, the freshman offensive tackle that's third team that hasn't played yet should not be making NIL on top of the revenue share agreement, if that makes any sense.
So I don't want to lose people, but I do think this is one of the most important things going on right now because the sense that's out there is when you do move into this new era of the revenue sharing, and when I believe it's Deloitte, when they start examining these third-party NIL deals and they have to kind of fall within the boundaries of fair market value, what some people believe is that some of the craziest stuff that we hear right now could, at least in theory, go away. In other words, part of the reason smart people will tell you that some of these negotiations for, the best high school players, for instance, have been so outlandish maybe within the last year or so is because these programs were trying to front load these deals before the third party scrutiny begins. In other words, if I've got the deal already in place, then nobody can come in here and judge it and say, oh, that's pay for play, that's unfair value because it was already signed before this new scrutiny takes place. Do you think that change is going to really occur, or is this going to end up being kind of like it used to be where you've got revenue sharing payments, you've got, regular NIL deals, but you still got money under the table that nobody, wants to talk about or wants to pay attention to because the very best programs are sort of always going to find a way to figure out, how to do it. Is it really about to change where the kind of pay-for-play stuff becomes a little bit more stabilized than perhaps it has appeared to be in these last couple of years?
Well, Brandon, anything can be more stable than it is right now. I mean, you hear stories of guys that didn't even start or maybe third team at Georgia that getting, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year to go play somewhere else in the Power Four. I believe in a free market economy, recruiting will eventually happen, Brandon. Like, if that door's blocked and that door's blocked and that door's blocked, things will revert to the way they used to be. I think, Brandon, here's a good example. The scrutiny, I think, will be very interesting. Like, take the case of Tyler Atkinson, okay? Tyler Atkinson is now, I don't know if you saw all those other social media pictures that popped out this week, but Tyler, he was hobnobbing, man. He was hobnobbing in New Orleans with Jalon Walker, Micah Parsons, the president of Adidas, the CEO of Adidas. He's already an Adidas athlete. He was one of like 4 or 5 high school prospects last year that signed with Adidas and had some level of, NIL deal there. And I think you start sitting there and you're going, okay, look at the followers for Atkinson. Look at the social media followers he has on Instagram and all other social platforms. The guy's got a brand. He's got his own youth football camps he uses in NIL for. That's somebody where you can sit there and say that guy has established some sort of trend in the marketplace where you're not talking about a young man from Blackshear that runs a 4.4 that he's just going to be a great football player one day. I mean, I think some of the things that Tyler has done is he has established himself as having an actual brand. And one of those things, Brandon, I think we say it a lot on Before the Hedges, but I still feel quarterback and offensive tackle are the most important positions Georgia needs to address in this next recruiting class. But I feel like Atkinson is the most important player. And I'm not trying to speak out of both sides of my mouth, but that guy right there, I think, is a plug and play, at least number 2 reps by the end of his freshman year at Georgia. I think he completes continues the lineage of culture where your best players in a unit or in a room are probably your hardest workers on your team right out of the gate. And listen, he's going to carry a tag. I think Georgia's going to meet that tag, whatever it takes. But the things you hear consistently from Atkinson in his camp is development and relationships. He's one of those prospects that get it, Brandon. He realizes that he needs to make moves now that prepare him for 2029 and not the fall of 2026. It's a long-term gain. It's a long-term progress, not short-term money. And you see Tyler, everything he's done throughout his career. I would say if this was gymnastics in Olympics, I would say even the Romanian judge would give him a 10.0 for all the steps and the moves he's made so far in his high school career. Not only getting noticed, getting ranked, looking like an alpha in the class, but also establishing a brand in today's complicated sports marketplace.
I think that's really interesting. Another story that's come out recently is the proposed bill in Georgia to eliminate state income tax payments on NIL payments. I guess there's also now a proposal in Alabama to essentially copy this. Alabama always trying to copy Georgia, of course. How much of a game changer, if at all, do you think this could be? Because on the one hand, states like Texas, Tennessee, Florida, they already don't have state income tax for any of the citizenry. The Big Ten states, Ohio, Michigan, they obviously do have state income tax. For Georgia's recruiting efforts, the ability to say, hey, we won't make you pay state income tax on the payments you're going to receive, how much could that conceivably help Georgia, do you believe?
I would say it's a sweetener, Brandon. I would say I don't think Georgia will ever be the high bid for a lot of these marquee players, especially with this team known as the Oregon Ducks or Texas Longhorns around. But I think what it does is it gets Georgia in the ballpark, kind of pushes it a little bit closer to home plate in terms of, look at it. Some of these deals, Brandon, are going to be over $1 million. And so when you're not paying income tax on that, that makes the numbers go a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And, it's one of those things, too, where it sort of seems like, look, at a certain point, you've raised all the money you can raise. You've got all the dollars you can get. What can you do sort of from an ingenuity standpoint, creativity standpoint, to try to find a way to sort of squeeze a little bit more out of that? Well, that's what stuff like this could potentially be. It's probably only a small amount of money in comparison to the larger picture, and other states can essentially provide the same thing. But it's an example, I think, of just trying to be as creative as you can possibly be.
I think it's really evening the playing field, Brandon, because if Texas is spending a lot and they don't have to pay state income tax, or the University of Tennessee or Miami, listen, Brandon, those are 3 of the biggest 10 names in the NIL game right now. And if you can put Georgia at least on the level playing field with some of those, I think, it's an arms race, Brandon, in every area. And the more Georgia can be on equal footing in terms of some minutia here of tax law, they're going to be head and shoulders above some of those programs in all the other areas like relationships, development, and really having a scheme that says you want to shake Roger Goodell's hand in 3 years. Well, we've had 9 guys at your position shake his hand in the last 4 or 5 years.
All right, so this is the last time you and I get a chance to talk for a little while. Going to be gone next week. But before we do, give me a little bit of snapshot of kind of where things stand with the 2026 class here right now. What's next? What do the next few weeks look like? Obviously, we're still in a dead period here for the month of February, but what's about to happen with all of this in the weeks to come?
Well, Brandon, this is about the 6-week, 7-week period of the high school football players calendar where they're doing 7-on-7s. And I think that's interesting because the coaches can't be there, but the film will all get out. Well, Brandon, one thing that's happening that is unusual for this time period, Well, I'll give you two things. One of them is you see more and more players, Brandon. They've already not only set up their top schools, but they're scheduled their official visits into July already. Remember, we've done a good job on this program of telling folks that, hey, Georgia tries to land all their alphas on that last weekend in May. The first weekend in June is usually May 30th, June 1st, June 2nd, something like that. Well, now Georgia has built in kind of two mega amazing weekends right now. You're seeing that in June 13th to 15th, where the May 30th weekend visitors are already coming together. The names, I've already got them on spreadsheets. Well, there's going to be an equally big one on June 13th to the 15th that stands is probably just as good or bigger. Like Curtis is going to be a part of that. Some other big names are going to be a part of that as well. I think that's intriguing, Brandon. One thing I will say is we will have a reversal of this in-state trend. You know, Brandon, there's the feeling that homegrown Georgia players are more likely to stick when they don't play. They'll retain them a little bit better. Perhaps they grew up as Georgia fans and they won't cost as much as maybe the high bids elsewhere. Well, Brandon, there's just not a lot of players in the state of Georgia this year. Like, this is one of those years. Here's a good point in our story today about Jared Grizzly Smith. I hope Dog fans will still allow us to use a nickname for a man that kind of sounds like the same species as of one from the 2022 class. But this is a Grizzly. This is not Bear. But, Brandon, I was kind of charting because I was at the Under Armour Atlanta camp this past weekend. And I'll be honest, Brandon, there were times where I'm like, I don't need to watch the Final Five or the OLs versus DLs because there's only 2 or 3 players in the whole group that Georgia has even offered or even extensively recruiting. And it's really a down year for, like, Georgia last year. Brandon signed 21 in-state Georgians. Well, that was the most since 2013, Brandon. If they signed 21 in-state Georgians this year, something went wrong, man, because like offensive and defensive line, for instance, Brandon, you know, there's only one tackle in the state of Georgia rated among the nation's top 800 players.
Wow. Very different.
That's a guy, and you'll know the name, Heezy Kent. Brandon, he's a converted tight end. He hasn't really been a tackle yet whatsoever. Yeah. And the other in-state offensive guys, they're interior linemen, Brandon. There's not another top 100 or 200 or 300. There's only like 8 guys, I believe, in the state of Georgia that play offensive or defensive line that are ranked among the nation's top 800 players, Brandon. That is a steep drop-off. Just a year ago, Brandon, there were 14 OLs, that's tackles or interior guys, ranked among the top 500. So the players, the state of Georgia, now the skill guys are still there, but the lines of scrimmage, Brandon, they're just not there this year.
Really, really interesting. It's one of the reasons why recruiting battles a year ago for like Juan Caston or Elijah Griffin, why those battles proved to be so important, because when it comes to the rare commodity that is the big athlete, you know, in every year you don't have kind of an equal dose. We see this with the NFL draft a little bit too, where there are probably more quality defensive linemen in this year's draft than perhaps there would have been maybe a year ago. It's just kind of a rare athlete, someone athletic enough that has the size, you know, potential to also play on both offense, or certainly in the case of the defensive line. You won't have equal measures of that doled out in each and every year, will you?
Yep. Brandon, there's a guy I went and spoke to this weekend, Ernest Rankins out of Southwest DeKalb. Brandon, you and I have been doing this a long time. Do you ever remember us really talking about anybody at Southwest DeKalb?
Been a while.
That Georgia's recruiting? No, maybe Sam Turner last year, but he was a wide receiver, but I don't know if his offer was committable. There's a guy, 6'5", 270 pounds, Ernest Rankins at Southwest DeKalb. Now, he transferred over from Cedar Grove, but he is like the only player in the state that's a defensive lineman, the interior defensive lineman, the guys that Kirby and Trey Scott win games with, Brandon. He's about the only guy in the state that, because of the scarcity of it, Brandon, it's kind of like a baseball card where it's got, you know, it's autographed, it's certified, it's maybe game used, or it's on a limited number, a limited series. There's some exclusivity there with Ernest. And I think Ernest is going to get really big simply because he's one of the only ones in the state. Now, he really likes Auburn, Alabama. He loves Georgia. That's kind of his top 3. He's also got Texas in there, but really intriguing kid we're going to write about on DawgNation.com soon, because this is a young man that wants to be like a forensic scientist when he gets through with football, Brandon. I don't know if it's TV or all these Netflix binges that people watch, but young people these days are coming up with some very clever careers. I'm waiting for someone to say a daily podcaster for your favorite football team.
Listen, one of these days, maybe. Hey, great stuff, Jeff. Thanks for your time. Hope you enjoy the weekend. Happy Valentine's Day to you and all those that you love. And we will see you back here very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
Hey, buddy, enjoy the recharge. You've earned it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, just to kind of repeat for a minute what we sort of started with Jeff saying is, in the world in which we live in, for all the attention the NIL gets, for all the attention that certainly transfer portal gets, when you look at the actual recent trend, recruiting still matters. And there's a certain kind of athlete that at least recently you'd be led to believe if you don't get him coming out of high school, you may not get him because a lot more of those guys are staying put. And teams are getting smart about using their pool of money, whatever that pool is, a large or medium amount, whatever that amount is, a lot more of these teams using that money to keep their guys as opposed to getting all that serious about poaching off other rosters. And that's true at the highest level and seemingly levels below too. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, you talk about recharging batteries. No better way to do that than on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I'm not taking one next week, but I wish that I was. I can't quite get the family away for right now. But I'm telling you right now, when you do get away, you're going to enjoy everything that Royal Caribbean has to offer, including, and I can't wait to showcase this on our DawgNation cruise. You know, a lot of the new Oasis class ships have like the Mason jar. I would say that of all the specialty restaurants on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, the Mason jar might be my favorite. It's got the Southern themed food. It's got the bourbon style cocktails in the bar. Got the country band that sort of plays late into the night. So country music, bourbon cocktails, Southern, themed food, all of that, you better believe, my absolute favorite stuff. And it's the best thing about, to me, one of the best things about a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation is that at night, you have a chance to sort of hop from like bar to bar, lounge to lounge, and enjoy just sort of its own, like your own sort of personal pub crawl. And as you move from place to place, not only do you get some great tasting beverages, but there's like live music, like 4 or 5 different bands playing in various places. And that's the kind of thing in my normal life these days I don't get to do that much of. We're at home, we're busy, we're taking care of kids, we're oftentimes going to bed early. Well, on a cruise, I'm not going to bed early. I'm staying up late. I'm going to enjoy the scene. I'm going to take advantage of all the stuff that it has to offer. And that's why these really cool ships like Utopia of the Seas, we're going to be on for our DawgNation cruise, or Icon of the Seas, or Coming Soon Star of the Seas. That's why they're so much fun, because they have so many different great things to do and enjoy. So Jessica Slater's a terrific travel agent. She can tell you all about all of the options you have available for you on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you more about anything you need to know for a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here in 2025. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC right now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'm going to start something today that we're going to do on Monday and Tuesday of next week. This is the time of year in which I like to take a little bit of a snapshot of not just Georgia, but what does the rest of the SEC look like moving into the spring, and then before you know it, you're kind of into the summer, and then in the fall, the season begins. So it's a little bit of a snapshot of each of these teams. We're going to do like 5 a day today, Monday, and Tuesday, and that'll give us, pretty much the entirety of the SEC. So it's kind of like one big question for each SEC team, starting with Auburn. I think that Auburn's among the more interesting teams in the SEC this year because thus far, a very high-profile coaching hire has really not made much of an impact in the league one way or another. Hugh Freeze was a coach at Ole Miss. Now, obviously, there was some recruiting improprieties that went along with this, but beat Alabama twice in 2014 and 2015, made a couple of New Year's Six Bowls. This was a very successful coach by Ole Miss standards. Then he had his issues, kind of sort of persona non grata in the SEC for a while, but now he's back. Thus far, his impact at Auburn has not really been all that significant. And perhaps Auburn is the best example of what I was saying to Jeff a moment ago, which the teams that have hoped for like really robust hauls out of the transfer portal, transformational, game-changing players, kind of like what Ole Miss tried to do in 2024. The teams that have tried to replicate that, for the most part, those guys haven't really been there. Now, we think that Auburn's been pretty successful in the transfer portal this year. Jackson Arnold gives them a chance to have an upgraded quarterback. They're going to have a pretty deep quarterback room. But they've tried to do the best they can in finding the portal guys they could get, because we believe that Auburn has money to spend, but not always has it found players it wants to spend it on. So I think the big question as it relates to Auburn is Hugh Freeze ready to transform this program? Is he capable of transforming this program? Because Auburn took a lot of PR blows, a lot of criticism for hiring Freeze, because Freeze obviously came to Auburn with some baggage. But they did that because in the aftermath of obviously would have been the disaster of Brian Harsin, they at least thought he was a proven winner. Well, thus far, Hugh Freeze is not really winning. Now, I think that they probably are due for a pretty big upgrade in performance. I'm actually fairly high. This is not my preference, but just in trying to, make accurate predictions, I do believe that Auburn will probably be better in 2025. But if you're an Auburn fan, you would say it's about time for Hugh Freeze to do something. They took criticism for hiring him, and yet the payoff that you endured the criticism for, thus far they haven't really gotten that. Alabama, let's mention them here for a moment. I think the one big question for Alabama is pretty obvious here right now. Who's the starting quarterback going to be? This has been as much of a quarterback-led program as any in America for quite some time. And that's not really quite what Nick Saban started off as, obviously. They were about a lot more than quarterback. But once they kind of really got it rolling with Jalen Hurts, and then Hurts gave way to Tua Tagovailoa, and then Tua Tagovailoa gave way to Mac Jones, and Mac Jones gave way to Bryce Young, and then Bryce Young gave way to Jalen Milroe. Milroe not at the same level of success the other guys had. But nonetheless, this is a program that has gone as its quarterback has gone. Milroe played great against Georgia, didn't always play great against other teams, and that was sort of the story for Alabama last year in the first year of Kalen DeBoer. Well, now Milroe's gone, and it's not obvious to me who his replacement's going to be. I think it's probably Austin Mack. That's a guy they brought in as a part of the class of 2024. That seems to be sort of a hand-picked guy for DeBoer and his new offensive coordinator that he knows very well, Ryan Grubb. But you want to kind of really get into one of the juiciest storylines this spring. It's one of the reasons why I love spring practice. I hope we have it forever, because stuff like this is so interesting. Who is going to emerge as the Alabama starting quarterback in a year where DeBoer needs something good to happen for him? A program that's been very dependent on quarterback does not, at least to my knowledge, a couple hundred miles away here, have the next guy obviously lined up as the heir apparent. Speaking of quarterback, I'll also mention that too when it comes to Vanderbilt. This is sort of a fun one. Diego Pavia obviously gets the chance to come back. You kind of wonder, is Pavia a one-hit wonder? Like, was it just the 1 year for him where he sort of captured the imagination seemingly of everybody? Or is the legal battle that he's fought to kind of be back and have another year of eligibility in college football, does that now add up to something even more than it was last year, where it gave him a chance to upset in Alabama, kept him competitive in other games too? Pavia is one of those really fun, kind of came from out of nowhere, New Mexico State into the SEC, now gets a chance to sort of stick around here. He's given new life to Clark Lee as Vanderbilt's coach. But is there a second act now for Pavia that's even more impressive than what he was able to put together last year? If so, that makes Vanderbilt a much tougher out for the teams that have to play it, because that was sort of the thing that became the emerging story last year. At one point, you were excited if you were one of the teams that were selected to play Vanderbilt in obviously a year in which the SEC schedules were getting so much tougher. But as you saw how Vandy at times played last year, all of a sudden you came to the conclusion of, gosh, this was supposed to be our easy game, and not even it is very easy anymore. For LSU, here's what we'll mention for them. Obviously Garrett Nussmeier coming back, but the bigger issue for me is Brian Kelly still one of college football's top coaches? Because isn't it interesting, one of the discussions you'll hear media types have, and we sort of do this too, is, hey, who's the next head coach without a national championship who might win his first? Who's the next, coach to sort of join the national champions club? And right now you're hearing a lot about Steve Sarkisian. You're hearing a lot about Dan Lanning. You're hearing maybe some about James Franklin. At one point in time, a name you would have heard in that might have been Brian Kelly, especially when Kelly left Notre Dame to come to LSU, because presumably we're led to believe he left because he didn't think that Notre Dame could win a national championship. And obviously LSU's a place where the last 3 coaches prior to him had brought a title home. But gosh, now, I mean, because of how LSU has played, because of how Notre Dame has also played in the absence of Kelly, all of a sudden now you're not really hearing Brian Kelly talked about in the same reverence as among the very best coaches in college football. Is that just what has occurred? Has his reputation eroded for good reason? Or can he do something to get that back? We believe, and we'll get more into the individual names as the offseason, rolls on. We believe they've probably been a little bit better about how they've used some of their NIL dollars than they maybe were in the past. They got outbid a lot. They seemingly didn't know quite how to negotiate the right way. Perhaps that's improved for them. But this is a big year coming up for Kelly individually, because LSU is a place where you should win. Most coaches do, at least get at least one national championship while they're there. And Brian Kelly right now kind of below that standard after having Jane Daniels and all the stuff he's had going for them, not quite succeeding with that. Big year coming up for him. And then finally for Arkansas, we love Sam Pittman. Happy to see Pittman coming back. You kind of wonder, is there more magic left in the tank for him? Is this a guy that can find another big upset? Is this a guy that can, sort of capture the imagination once again? Obviously was sort of skating on thin ice for a lot last year, but probably did just enough to keep his job when he first got hired. Think about 2020, 2021. This was one of the best coaches in the SEC against the spread, working as an underdog, a very, very tough out. Last couple of years, that's obviously been much less true. Can he get some of that back? Admittedly, as much as his interests don't, run counter to Georgia's, we'll be rooting for Pittman to be able to do just that. And we'll do more of these on Monday and Tuesday. And for now, make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So all of that is the story for football next fall. But it's another season that's beginning today here in the SEC. We're going to talk about that as a part of our long finish. College baseball begins. Diamond Dogs up in Wilmington, North Carolina. Got kind of one of these barnstorming deals where they're going to play Quinnipiac today and then come back and play them. They got basically 2 games against Quinnipiac. 1 game today, play Quinnipiac again tomorrow. Then they're going to play UNC Wilmington tomorrow evening and then come back and play UNC Wilmington again on Sunday. So it's like 4 games in the next 3 days. Diamond Dogs with Kennesaw State coming after that. They got a long stretch of games here in a very sort of truncated amount of time as they get ready to begin their 2025 season. We're going to learn a lot about them pretty quick. We think pitching-wise, they can be much improved. Offensively, they've obviously got the challenge of replacing Charlie Condon. It seems like they may try to be aggressive on the base paths a little bit this year, take advantage of that. The transfer class they have brought in has been lauded. In fact, you've seen all the preseason rankings, whether it's D1 or Baseball America or Perfect Game or any of these outfits that rank these baseball teams. Right now, the Diamond Dogs, led by Wes Johnson, are considered to have among the best chances of anyone to make it to Omaha, the College World Series. For Georgia, after being in a super regional a year ago, wouldn't it be fun to watch them take that next step here this year? Well, a few days ago, just prior to the start of the season, as kind of a preview of what starts to happen here today, Wes Johnson talked about the challenge of playing in an incredibly difficult SEC and also the challenge of knowing there are a lot more expectations for this version of Georgia baseball than almost any baseball team here in Athens for quite some time. This is Wes Johnson, a nice preview of the mindset that Georgia begins its 2025 campaign with.
Yeah, that just means you got a chance to be good, right? That's what all the preseason hype means. Now you got to go do it. But, it's our league. You're not going to hide anywhere in this league. If people think you're supposed to be good, they're gonna give you publicity and so forth. I don't know that you can ever say anybody in the SEC's ever been an underdog. So it's not like you're going to hide. So you better get used to it, right? You better, I've said for a long time, I've been in this league for a while. You play the toughest schedule, no matter what the schedules. Play just because you are in this league. You're playing the midweek against whoever, and if they can beat you, that's their signature win for the year. They can say they beat an SEC team. So, yeah, you better get used to the target a little bit if you're going to be good in this league. And hopefully we can go out and play well.
I absolutely love the ping in the background of the batting practice as Johnson speaking there. I tell you, man, college baseball is a fun sport. It's good to have it back. We wish them well. Game 1 for them actually begins shortly after our live show goes off the air. That's noon today. So a couple against Quinnipiac, a couple against UNC Wilmington. And with that, the Diamond Dogs will be off and running here in the 2025 season. As you're kicking back and relaxing and enjoying a little baseball, let me encourage you to enjoy some Finnish long drink as you take care of that business. Obviously, there's a Finnish long drink variety that we think is just perfect for you, whether it's the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. How about the long drink cranberry? A lot of folks love that. My wife, long drink traditional citrus. That's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. There's a peach flavored version, which we believe is perfect for those in the peach state. The long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. A lot of you have been enjoying the Finnish long drink for a long time. If you've heard me talk about it, want to find out where you can pick some up, best way to do that, go to the website. That's thelongdrink.com. Not only can you hear the story about kind of how it starts in Finland, worked its way to America, now here in Georgia, but you can also put in your zip code and find out where you can pick some up. This really fun, ready-to-drink cocktail, sort of a cool special category of beverage. And we believe from a flavor standpoint, the Finnish long drink, the dominant flavor in that beverage category. So online, thelongdrink.com for more on that. That's thelongdrink.com. Last golden shoe for me for a little while here. We got shows next week. We'll probably have a golden shoe for those, though. We'll give it to you on the screen here. We sort of a back-to-back winner. Jermaine King, we featured him yesterday. He also writes in today. I don't know if we talked about this or not, but it's really an amazing story. He says, I was watching a new video on the WWE YouTube page, and I made a discovery. Did you know that Elijah Holyfield was now training with the WWE? He's on one of their new kind of basically sort of talent development shows. Yes, we have been seeing that. Others have kind of mentioned this because they know I love wrestling. I mean, honestly, to me, Elijah Holyfield has kind of the perfect look for a wrestler. He always had a great physique while he was at Georgia. The famous last name, I think, probably really helps him too. Background to the sport of football, probably a good thing. So it would not surprise me at all if Elijah Holyfield kind of worked his way up the ranks there with the WWE, and we at some point in time see him as a part of that organization. That's kind of a cool thing. Best of luck to him. Jermaine will give you a golden shoe for mentioning that. Lousy, stinking Gators, if they were wrestlers, they'd get pinned right in the middle of the ring. They'd be forced to submit because they're basically just losers. Let's be honest about that. How about 1,560 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. We love our Gator Hater Updater. $1 Million. Eddie loves it. I love it. You love it too. Have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. We'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Kind of quick on the comments today. I got some pre-record stuff we got to do, getting ready for next week. And so we're going to bounce through here, do a few comments, then get ready to roll out of that. William Camacho shouting out Wes Johnson. He's excited about him. Yeah, we're excited about him too. We think he's doing a good job. Let's see what else. Grady Darcy says that Andrew Thacker, the new nickel coach at Georgia, great dude. Yeah, this is kind of coming out, I guess, just as we're kind of getting ready for the show here today. We're going to probably do some more stuff on that next week, but you love to see that. Let's see what else. Pete Williams says, I wonder if Family Man has learned to dance at family reunions. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Obviously, there was the video of Tim trying to dance when he first got the job and the fake Southern accent. So, yeah, Brian Kelly has certainly had his issues with that, for sure. Let's see what else on Facebook here. Yeah, a lot of good stuff in here. Let's see the YouTube side of things here for a moment. Mark Woodmansee likes Diego Pavia. I do as well. Brodo Baggins pointing out that in his career, Hugh Freeze now 0-4 against Diego Pavia. Yeah, tough situation there. Going back to New Mexico State now at Vanderbilt. That's tough. Jonathan there, and I'm not sure if I can read that one, but funny stuff. G. Gray says that Brian Kelly's a 9-win coach. That's about it. Yeah, it certainly seems like he's kind of sort of stuck in that at that ceiling right now. At Notre Dame, one of the things he was really good at is, they never really got upset, never really lost games to unranked teams, never really lost when they were favored. They had a hard time stepping up against more talented teams, but for the most part took care of business against the teams they were supposed to beat. There hasn't been as much of that at LSU. And, hard to imagine that Kelly performed so badly that he gets fired or something like that. But I think eventually we may start seeing more coaches kind of leave on their own and just go take a different job somewhere else because, you just sort of see eventually people just get tired of each other. Coach gets tired of the program. Fans get tired of the coach. You could start to see more of these guys just sort of leaving of their own volition here. Could perhaps happen. G. Grace also mentions the extra year of eligibility and stuff like that Pavia got. This is one of those things where I'm pretty skeptical about whether or not that's a good idea for college athletics overall. I do agree with that. That if we let everybody have extra eligibility, of course the players that are currently playing, they'd want that for themselves, but this is really blocking the next generation from players from having a place to play. And this is one of the reasons why when people talk about the need for collective bargaining at the college level, we're not really giving the future college football player a seat at that table. And it becomes a very short-term negotiation if it's about the current players getting as much as they can, future be damned. That's pretty risky, I would say. Jerry Dog Fan says, will Atlanta draft a dog this year? We said this in the show this week. I think we're going to do something on this a little bit next week too. This is becoming more and more of a real talking point where Georgia fans have been saying this forever, and you were having a hard time getting other media people to take that topic seriously. It's being taken far more seriously now than it used to. It's becoming more of a real thing, I believe, for sure. Chef Jay Bowen says it would be awesome if Georgia baseball could win the national title. Oh, I like this. He says you got Nate Frazier there saying we could run away together. Really funny. Be mine. It's the smart choice. These are sort of the classic Valentines when you were a kid. I'm so lucky to have you in my life. Very well done. I don't know about that. I'd move to Miami for you. It's pretty funny. I'm sure that'll probably get a strong reaction as well. These are pretty clever. Cody, do we know who made these? Yeah, really well done by our buddy Arnav that works in our Instagram account. Very, very clever by him on that. Very funny stuff to see. You love that. You love that. To go back to Chef Jay's question or comment, see Georgia win a national championship baseball, same time it wins one in football? Yeah, listen, that'd be very, very, very fun. No doubt about that. Blind Squirrel Sports says, it took some time, but I'm actually starting to embrace the local NFL team not drafting dogs. He says, I want to see our players win Super Bowls. So there you go on that. By the way, I saw where similar kind of controversy to this, where did y'all see where I guess they're mad at Villanova up in Philadelphia because Villanova did not cancel school for the Eagles parade today. It's the only of the major colleges in, they call them the Big Five in Philadelphia. The only one not to cancel school today was Villanova. And so I guess much how Georgia fans would say the Falcons don't show enough love to Georgia, I guess you've got the Eagles fans saying Villanova's not showing enough love to the local Eagles team, which I thought was kind of interesting. Gary Roach saying have a great weekend. We appreciate that. Right back at you. We're going to check out ourselves here in just a minute. Yeah, pretty funny stuff from DawgNation on Instagram, too, earlier. Y'all should check out the DawgNation Instagram page. It's really good. Garrison Tucker says, who gets more success this season? Georgia baseball or the Braves? It's kind of funny. The Braves over-under is still pretty high. A lot of the analytics projections still have them as the best team in the National League East. If I'm being honest, I don't believe I see it. I don't believe I see it. I mean, Spencer Strider not going to begin the year with Atlanta. Ronald Acuna Jr. not going to begin the year with Atlanta. Still got some injury recovery going on. I sort of get the impression, and I hope I'm wrong about this, obviously, because spring and summer is an awful long time if you don't have a good baseball team in your life. But I do not have high expectations of the Braves this year. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on that. Oftentimes I am. Don't have high expectations for the Braves. Still do have pretty high expectations for Georgia, so I'll take Georgia over the Braves there. West GA Dog fan says Elijah Holyfield is going to send Dominic Mysterio to TNA. Yeah, there you go. You love to see that. Yeah, I mean, I'm just telling you, I believe that Elijah Holyfield, I mean, they'll love him because of the famous last name. You know, pictures of him at Georgia, you remember they kind of went viral, that one of him like carrying the ball at Georgia practice because his arms look so big. He already kind of looks like a wrestler. Yeah, so West GA, you may be onto something there with that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall pointing out that Florida lost another assistant coach. Yeah, for all the talk about Florida being one of the teams, hey, I'm just learning this as you mentioning that. For all the talk about that, Florida being kind of a turnaround team this year, the lack of stability with their coaching staff, I do believe, is a little bit of a problem. I do. West GA Dog fan would like to see the Dog Nation cruise be in spring break week. That would be a good idea. We've kind of settled into our draft week just because people seem to enjoy that, but obviously a different crop of people could certainly be able to go if it was more of the spring break week. I do get you on that. He also asked about Caden Prothro. I do believe, much like Bowman, Prothro is going to be one of those major targets for Georgia. Now, whether he's a wide receiver at the college level or a tight end, I guess you'll hope to get him here and sort of figure that out. But that's one of those guys that if you saw him during, like, the state championship or something like that, dynamic athlete. Garrison Tucker says, comparing DJ Lagway to Lenora Sellers, he says Lagway has a higher ceiling to me. I would probably agree with that. And I mean, a year ago, I wouldn't have told you that Lenora Sellers was very good at all. Boy, he really won me over the course of the year. He really did. But Lagway has a chance to be a special talent. But as we said, you've still got Billy Napier seemingly calling plays there. You've got all kinds of change over the defensive coaching staff. For a team that's supposed to be better and turning things around, they're having a hard time holding on to and maintaining stability with their coaching staff, which I think is oftentimes weird. Savannah Bryan says, I dropped FanDuel from my cable yesterday. That's the new branding for the old Bally Network. He says, I don't want to watch the Braves lose 100 games this season. I don't think they're going to be that bad now. I don't think they're going to be anywhere near that bad. But do I think they're going to win 90 games? That projection seems a little high for me. That one seems a little high for me. UGA Marine also pointing out that Sellers plays probably the more favorable schedule at South Carolina. That's probably true. Gamecocks don't have a good defense, though, I think. Chef Jay Bowen asked about an Alaskan cruise. I have not been on an Alaskan cruise. I really want to go on one, though. My daughter really wants to go on one. She's young. She's only 9. But she really wants to go on an Alaskan cruise. So hopefully one of these days we'll get a chance to do that. Hopefully so. All right, final comments. Grady Darcy wants to see Goldberg against Holyfield. I'd heard tell that Goldberg's getting ready to have his last match coming up pretty soon. Is that right? Kind of a farewell for him. I don't know if that's going to be at WrestleMania or something else, but it seems like we could be getting into last match territory for Goldberg. Obviously, the road to WrestleMania is ongoing here right now. Bill Sanders checking out. Matt Rukavina says of Brian Kelly that he's a square peg and a round hole at LSU. He says, let me read the rest of this. He says, who would have thought a Massachusetts Northerner wouldn't fit in the Bayou? Very funny by Matt, and I believe he's probably right about that. Marshall Fleming says, Sellers' high ceiling is the best college ball quarterback. He says, if you say different, you're not watching the last 6 games. Yeah, I think that Marshall is right about the way in which it's weird. I mean, there was probably time near the beginning of the season that I was probably talking about him about as like worst quarterback in the SEC. But as Marshall points out, through the month of November, and I didn't have probably a great bowl game, I don't guess, but like through the month of November, that Lenora Sellers was really playing about as you would expect, like the best quarterback in the sport to play. He had a very good like you say, kind of final 6 games of the regular season, very good. Very good. Philip Jordan Wells says you don't need to win 90 games anymore to win the World Series. That's obviously true. So maybe the Braves can, sneak into the playoffs and get hot at the right time. Maybe that's the case. G. Gray says that the LSU should have hired Joe Brady as head coach. So I don't get the sense that Brady wants any part of college football, because even when he was not exactly, the hottest commodity in the NFL after he got fired by Carolina, I still don't think he had any interest in returning to college. It seems like he is an NFL lifer at this point. All right, we got to go. Enjoy the weekend, everybody. We will be back here all 5 days next week, Monday, Tuesday, and then kind of an interesting combination of stuff for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We think you're going to like it. We always appreciate you being with us. It's so generous of you to share your time with us, and we certainly try to make good use of it. So y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on that. Hope you have a great weekend, and if you have a plumbing emergency or something like that, let R.S. Andrews swoop in and maybe replace your water heater or fix your pipe or whatever else to keep that weekend from being ruined. After all, the RS stands for rapid service. That means they show up quick, they take care of your business very, very fast if you've got some sort of issue. So online at rsandrews.com. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Happy Valentine's, everybody.